Yes, sir. I need an ambulance as soon as possible, sir. Sir, we have a gentleman here that needs help, and he's not breathing.
We all remember when the news broke. Michael Jackson was gone, the king of pop, the man who defined music videos, the voice behind Billie Jean, Thriller, and Man in the Mirror. A global icon whose career shaped pop music for more than 4 decades. The reaction was immediate. On June 25, 2009, everything began unfolding in a matter of hours. At 12:21 in the afternoon, a 911 operator in Los Angeles received a call from inside Holmby Hills, where Michael Jackson was staying in a rented mansion. CPR had already begun, and an ambulance was requested immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They were led upstairs to Michael's bedroom, where his personal physician, Conrad Murray, was already there. Michael was on the bed. The emergency teams took over, trying to revive him. Soon, he was rushed to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. Then, at 2:26 p.m., doctors pronounced him dead. The first report said cardiac arrest. And technically, that was true. His heart had stopped. But cardiac arrest is how someone dies. It's not why. So what actually happened inside that bedroom before the 911 call was made? And most importantly, how did a man preparing for a 50-show comeback tour end up dying in his sleep? When authorities began searching what happened inside that bedroom, one name became important: Dr. Conrad Murray. That morning, Michael Jackson followed a familiar pattern. He had been unable to sleep for weeks because rehearsals for the upcoming tour were intense, and his insomnia became a serious concern. So Murray was trying various medications to help Jackson rest. They were just small doses of sedatives through the night. When those did not work, Murray eventually gave a measured amount of propofol, a powerful anesthetic typically used in surgical settings. Murray said it was just a small dose, but he never mentioned propofol in the first place. There couldn't be any reason that he forgot. He even referred to it as milk. That changes everything. After that, Jackson fell asleep, and Murray stayed in the room to watch over him. At some point, he stepped out briefly to use the bathroom, and when he returned, Jackson was not breathing. Murray said he immediately began CPR and tried to revive him alone before calling for emergency help. In his words, the situation got worse quickly without warning. Phone records later showed activity during the critical window that morning. Calls were placed and received around the time Murray said he had been focused entirely on trying to save Jackson. The timeline became a point of scrutiny for prosecutors who would later argue that those minutes mattered. Now, Murray also maintained that he never intended harm. Jackson was dependent on sleep aids and that he had been trying to wean him off stronger medication. He described himself as acting in his patient's interest, not recklessly but under pressure to help him rest. So he denied giving a lethal dose, abandoning him, or having criminal intent. Murray continued to insist that Jackson requested the medication and that the amount was not meant to be fatal. He framed the tragedy as an accident, like a doctor attempting to solve a sleep problem that turned into death. But as investigators compared Murray's statements with medical records and physical evidence from the room, questions started to surface. Because while his version described a brief absence and a sudden emergency, the forensic details would suggest something more complicated. And the autopsy was about to tell a more complicated story. First, propofol is not a typical sleep aid. It's a powerful anesthetic that is used to induce and maintain general anesthesia during surgery. In hospitals, it's always administered by trained professionals in controlled environments, like in operating rooms equipped with oxygen, airway support, cardiac monitoring, and resuscitation equipment. It's designed to render a patient unconscious within seconds. Its effects are immediate. So are its risks. Propofol suppresses breathing. It can lower blood pressure. Without continuous monitoring, a patient can slip from sedation into respiratory arrest quickly. That is why its use outside of a surgical setting is highly unusual. It is not prescribed for home treatment of insomnia. Now, in this case, toxicology reports revealed propofol in Michael Jackson's system at levels consistent with surgical anesthesia. On the other hand, they found other sedatives, including benzodiazepines, which can further depress the central nervous system. The official cause of death was ruled acute propofol intoxication. The manner of death: homicide. It means the death resulted from the actions of another person. The medical issue was not simply that propofol had been present, it was how it was used. In a hospital, when patients receive propofol, they are continuously monitored with pulse oximeters, blood pressure cuffs, and cardiac devices. Even airway support is immediately available if something goes wrong. In a private bedroom, safeguards like these never exist. So how does a drug designed for operating rooms end up being used as a nightly sleep solution in a home? Maybe the environment itself created the danger. Even a dose intended for sedation could become fatal without proper monitoring. When breathing slows under propofol, intervention must be immediate, so delays matter. This also challenged the idea of a minor or small dose, because the concentration found in his blood was consistent with levels used to maintain anesthesia during surgical procedures. That distinction was critical. This was not an over-the-counter sleep medication. This was a surgical anesthetic. And without proper medical support around, even a small mistake could become dangerous. Now, science explained how he died, but it still didn't explain how things went this far. By the time June 2009 arrived, Michael Jackson was preparing for what was supposed to be a comeback on a historic scale. This Is It was announced as a 10-show residency in London. The demand exploded, and the schedule expanded to 50 dates at the O2 Arena. His rehearsals intensified as expectations grew higher. During that time, Jackson signed a contract with AEG Live to produce the shows. The deal carried some important financial stakes for the company, investors, and for Jackson too. He was managing substantial debt, ongoing expenses tied to his lifestyle, legal history, and property holdings. The concerts were not just performances, they were positioned as a financial reset. That's why rehearsals often ran late into the night, and sessions continued for hours. While physically Jackson was 50 years old, he was attempting choreography that had defined him in his 20s and 30s. It means the standard he set for himself never lowered. His sleep became inconsistent. Insomnia was not new in his life. Those close to him had spoken for years about difficulty resting before major events. But as the tour approached, the pressure rose. In that environment, sleep wasn't simply about comfort. It was necessary to keep rehearsals going and the entire production on track. This does not explain the medical decisions made in that bedroom, but it explains the climate around them. A high-stakes contract, compressed rehearsal schedule, and a performer determined to meet expectations that had followed him for 4 decades. By June 25th, the system around him was moving at full speed. The question is whether the human body at the center of it could keep up. But as the investigators looked closer, the story led them directly to Jackson's physician. In February 2010, Dr. Conrad Murray was formally charged with involuntary manslaughter in the death of Michael Jackson. His actions were criminally negligent, not because he intended harm, but because he failed to provide the care that was required when he was handling a powerful anesthetic. During the trial, the prosecution laid out all the information. They presented phone records showing activity during that morning, the absence of proper medical monitoring equipment in the bedroom. They called medical experts who testified that propofol should never have been used in a home setting without full anesthesia safeguards. Then, there was another thing that caught more attention: Murray's financial problems. Dr. Conrad Murray wasn't hired as a sleep specialist. He was brought in as Michael Jackson's personal physician ahead of the This Is It comeback tour in 2009. The contract was about to pay him around $150,000 per month. That's nearly $1.8 million a year. At the same time, Murray was struggling financially. He had child support obligations, lawsuits, and back taxes. In 2010, he filed for bankruptcy. Documents even revealed he was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt before Michael's death. So if this job disappeared, what happened to that income? Because the This Is It tour wasn't just a concert series, it was a financial reset for Michael. Everyone around him was under pressure to keep the machine running, and sleep had become the obstacle. The defense argued Jackson was desperate for rest and pressured Murray to provide stronger medication. They suggested that the doctor was placed in a difficult position by a demanding patient and extraordinary circumstances. But prosecutors maintained that the final decision rested with the physician. Was this a tragic accident, or was it criminal recklessness? After 6 weeks of testimony and roughly 9 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered. In November 2011, Murray was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He ultimately served about 2 years before being released. His medical license was revoked or suspended in multiple states, effectively ending his ability to practice medicine. Now, legally, the case was closed. But for many, the verdict did not settle everything. Even after a criminal conviction, questions around Michael Jackson never fully disappeared, because the public was not ready to accept it. As everyone knows, Jackson's relationship with major corporations and media institutions was always complicated. In 1984, during the filming of a commercial for Pepsi, a pyrotechnic malfunction left his hair and scalp severely burned. The incident caused a lawsuit and then settlement. For some fans, that moment marked the beginning of a narrative: a global brand incident, physical harm, and corporate silence. Years later, Jackson held ownership stakes in valuable music publishing, including partial rights connected to Sony Music Entertainment. That fueled another layer of suspicion. Some believed powerful industry interests stood to benefit financially from instability surrounding him. Still, there is no evidence connecting those corporate tensions to his death. But the perception of imbalance, artist versus institution, lingered. But other theories also began circulating. In various recordings made before his death, Jackson was expressing fears about powerful individuals in the industry. He suggested that people may want him gone, and that his death could be framed as drug-related. Some fans pointed to those recordings as evidence that his death had been planned. So, were they evidence of a credible threat, or reflections of paranoia shaped by decades of fame and legal battles? And there's nothing to support this murder-for-hire plot or coordinated industry attack theory. Still, the recordings remain part of online discourse. Now, recently, after court documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein became public, broader public distrust toward elite networks deepened. In that climate, older celebrity deaths were re-examined by online communities searching for patterns. That's where Jackson's name surfaced in speculative discussions, because high-profile figures became viewed through a lens of systemic suspicion. Again, no evidence tied those narratives to the official findings in his case. And then there is the simplest conspiracy of all, the fake death theory. Some fans still believe that he faked his death to escape pressure, debt, or public scrutiny that went online. These theories rely on photographs, alleged sightings, and timeline confusion. Then why do these narratives persist? When a figure like him dies suddenly, in a private room under medical supervision, the explanation can feel unsatisfying, even when it's legally resolved. That's why some people find it hard to accept negligence as the only explanation. But suspicion is not proof. And while there are too many questions, the official record stays the way it is. It was acute propofol intoxication, resulting in a conviction for involuntary manslaughter. Few artists have shaped global culture the way Michael Jackson did. For more than 4 decades, his music dominated charts across continents. Albums like Thriller changed the scale of the music industry. Even his choreography influenced generations of performers. And music videos transformed television into a stage for cinematic storytelling. For millions of people around the world, Jackson wasn't just a singer. He was the sound of an era. But his public image was never simple. Fame on that scale rarely is. Jackson's career included record-breaking success, intense media scrutiny, legal battles, physical injuries, and years of relentless pressure. By the time he began preparing for the This Is It concerts in 2009, he was both a legendary artist and a deeply complicated public figure. Then, on June 25th, everything stopped. But emotionally, the story never ended there. For many fans, the verdict answered the legal question while leaving a deeper one unsettled. How could a global superstar, one of the most recognized people on Earth, die in a private bedroom under those circumstances? Some people believe the official explanation, while others are skeptical, pointing to the pressures, the corporate conflicts, and the unusual details surrounding that final morning. Over time, the debate has simply changed shape. It moved from courtrooms to documentaries, online forums, and endless discussions about what really happened behind closed doors. Theories will continue to appear, fade, and reappear again. Maybe that's inevitable when someone that famous dies so suddenly. Because for many people, accepting the simplest explanation can feel harder than believing something larger was hidden. And so, years later, the music remains timeless, the legacy still enormous, and the final question, the one that began on that June afternoon, still echoes quietly in the background. What really happened inside that room? But what do you think? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.